And are we live? Yes, we are. Cool. So, hello everyone again, and welcome to yet another session on building a chat application using React.js. Now, in the previous session, what I did was I broke out the state of each of the messages for a conversation into its own area in the application state, and then I created both a reducer and a saga to basically load these messages in individually based on the conversation that we chose. Okay, so one of the bugs that we kind of got to at the end of the session though was when I selected this Kim O'Neill, it wasn't showing the information properly. Now I have in fact fixed this off stream, and it was actually something really basic that I did that was wrong. And all I did was in my saga, where I'm actually keeping the messages for the moment, the second conversation had an array, and then inside the array there was another array which had the messages in it. So the problem was when it was getting to here, it was trying to process that internal array that was inside of this array. So once I took that internal array away and just had the objects, now it actually loads in. Okay, so that was the bug that I saw at the very end of the last session that I was trying to fix. But now it's all fixed. Other than that, I didn't do anything else with the code. Now, what I want to do in this video is just fix a few things to do with loading messages, such as when I first refresh this application and it comes in, there's a delay between having the conversations loaded here and then seeing the first set of messages. All right, so as you can see, the conversations will come in, then there'll be a delay, and then we'll see the messages for the first selected conversation. I don't want that delay. Okay, I want these messages to be there immediately. Now, the reason why I want them to be there immediately is because in my conversation saga, for the first conversation that I have here, I left the messages there. All right, so there's really no reason why I even need to have to come over to my messages saga and fetch them from here. All right, I should be just fetching them from the conversations here, loading it in first time, and then it's in the store and we can just fetch it from there. All right, so that's the first thing I want to address. The second thing I want to address is I want to start adding some paging. So at the moment, when I'm loading in the messages, I'm loading in every single message that's available in the array. What I want to be able to do is basically add paging. So I might say I want to fetch the first 5 messages, and then subsequently, as I scroll up, we'll add some infinite scroll functionality that will load in the next set of pages, the next 5, then the next 5, then the next 5, and so on and so forth, right? Now, I'm not going to be implementing the infinite scroll part in this video. All I want to do is just implement that paging that will be involved at a later date, okay? So first, let's deal with the initial loading problem where when I do this, we get that delay and then the messages come in. And the way I'm going to fix that is firstly, I'm going to come to my conversation. I'm going to leave this array as here for messages, but I'm going to come over to my messages saga, this one here, right? And I'm actually going to remove this. So if I come down and I delete this entirely, because we're going to load this on initial load each time, if I save this, well, we're going to see no messages, all right? And in fact, it will never load the messages in. And that's because we don't have an entry here, all right? So it was always getting it from this set of data here in the messages saga, but I want it to now grab the initial messages here from this first conversation when it's loaded in. Cool. So what I can do is, well, first I'm just going to minimize this just to make it easier on myself. When I load in the conversations here, what I probably need to do is also run an action that will basically call messages loaded, passing in the messages that are a part of the first conversation here, right? So all we'll do here is go type messages loaded, and then I'll pass in the payload of, and I believe the payload I need for this action, if I look at what we've got here, is conversation ID and messages. So if I come down, oh, wrong file. If I come to this one again and I whack it in, well, conversation ID, that will come from the conversation 0.id, and the messages will come from conversation 0.messages. All right, so we're gonna add that to the store first, and the reason why I want to add it first is I want to make sure that the store updates the messages before it updates the conversations. You could probably do it either way around, but what I don't want to risk is that the selected conversation set, it goes and renders the chat UI and the messages haven't been loaded in yet. And we still get that slight delay. You're going to get a slight delay either way. So if you load the messages first, then it's probably going to re-render the messages list area first without the conversations being loaded. But I just feel like, as an application builder, you probably want to see the messages first anyway, before you want to see the conversations, even though you want to see both pretty closely tied to each other. So if I now run this, and in fact, I haven't ran my npm start down here, which was dumb of me. So just give me a moment. Or have I? Yeah, no, I have, sorry. I had two of them open. And we've got an error here anyway. Something is already running on port. No, just stop that. So what's the error we have here? Conversation is not defined. Conversation is not defined in conversations.js. What's it referring to? Oh, this. Conversations. Sorry, my bad. Conversations 0 and conversations 0 there. Cool. All right. So now if I come over, when I load the page, you'll see that it's pretty instantaneous that the messages load up with the conversations. Cool. Let's check that again. Cool. All right. But we can expect in a real application that when we click on another conversation, there'll be a slight delay before you'll actually see the messages come in. Now, I haven't added a loader yet, all right, and that's obviously a future step, but you can see that there should be a delay before you see a message. Now, this is just meant to simulate the fact that, this would be going off and making a network call to our GraphQL server in the future. I'm just doing this right now by setting a simple set timeout. All right, so delay, and then the messages come in. Cool. All right, so that is pretty much where I wanted to get to at the end of the last video, but I just ran out of time. Now, what I want to do next is, seeing that I've got all the messages loaded up front, maybe I just want to load in the first 3 messages, okay? And then kind of keep track of what the last message is that was rendered, and then from that, get the next 3. Then keep track of where this is, and then get the next 3, and so on and so forth, okay? So I think the best way to do this is to change the state of what is kept for messages, okay? So the first step I'm probably going to take is I'm going to close these 2 things up right now that we have and come over to my messages saga, which is currently representing the data that comes back from the server. Now, in fact, actually, before I do that, I might come to the store and update the initial state here. So we've got messages details. How do I want this to look? Let's think about this for a little bit. So I think that what we really need is an ability to keep track of, for each conversation, the last message that was loaded in. All right, so I'm thinking, and I'm just going to create an initial state for this for the moment. So we'll say message details, and we'll have, I don't know, we'll say 1, like so, and then here this will have last message ID, something like that. So this might be equal to some ID that's on, or some unique message ID that's in the messages. So it might be 1, 2, 3, something like that. I think we need to keep track of whether there's any more messages to load. You know, maybe we've gone so far back in history that there actually are no more messages to load. So we probably need a property that says has more messages, something like that. And this could be true or false. So say we've loaded all 9, this would be false. But just say we've loaded the first 3, this would say true. You know, something like that. So we probably need a flag for that. And then obviously we need our messages themselves. So that would be your array. And I think for the moment, that's all I'm really going to look into. Obviously, the conversation ID will be up here. So really the 4 things that we need to keep track of a set of messages for a conversation is a conversation ID, last message ID, has more messages, and messages. Now, that's what I want to keep in the store. So obviously, I'm going to have to update the messages loaded. The messages loaded. Its method here. So this here, the code in here. And what I realize I haven't done yet is also brought over, and I'm looking at the wrong thing. I also haven't added or changed the new message added functionality yet. All right. So I believe this is still working. So if I type a message, it still loads it in at the moment. So it's not broken. But obviously when we change the behavior of the state for a message, it's going to basically create a situation where we're going to need to add it to this state rather than the other state. Cool. All right. So I think the next step is to work out, maybe even change the maybe the shell first, or sorry, the container. So basically, we'll change the format of this thing first, maybe. Just trying to work out the best plan of attack here in terms of what we want for paging. Or maybe we'll update the data in the store first, and then we'll worry about the UI. Can we do it that way? So we can invoke an action, and that action will create what we need to load into this new section, and then we can actually load it in. Okay, so what I might do is I might come to the Saga first and define how we're going to yield this new action with the information we need to put into the store. So let's think about how this is going to work. I think we need those 4 properties on our payload, right? So we need messages loaded. We probably need the conversation ID, which is already there, I just realized. We need the messages. We probably need the has more messages, like so. That probably needs to be passed. And obviously, we probably need the last message ID. All right. So we're going to include all that as part of the action. And I might even put the conversation first, ID first, like so. And I'm just going to have a quick look at the action I've got here. As we can see, messages load only has a couple of things. So we're going to now probably pass in, do I pass in more there? Yes. So this will actually, are we ever calling this? I just realized, messages loaded. Where is this called? I don't think I'm ever using this, actually. No, we're not. We're never using this. We're using this in the effects. So that's actually not needed. I just realized that. We're actually just passing it through from here. Yeah. But I'm now wondering, because this is used in the conversation bit that we just added here, we're going to potentially need to fire off an action. So maybe if I go back to the action, and I do use this, passing in has, what was it? What did I call it? Yeah, these two. Has more messages, like so. And last message. And here we'll have has more messages and last message ID as well. So this is now changed. Oops. And now we're going to use this in our areas, which, so yield puts, we're going to use that, passing in the 4 things that we want to pass in. I'm going to do that and probably do something like this and remove all this. So now we're yielding put messages loaded, so I need to import messages loaded, import messages loaded from actions. Cool. Now I don't have these 2 things, but that's fine for now. Yeah, it's not defined. You can shut up. We'll just put const, and for now I'm just going to add has more messages. Actually, I'll just create 2 variables for this for now. Const has more messages. I'll set it to false. And I'll add these later, or give it real values later. And last message ID, we'll just set that to null for the moment. Like so, so it's to fix that. So this is in the messages saga, and now I need to use this same data over here. And I'm going to, no, not this one. That's the messages reducer, conversation saga, sorry. So here's the messages loaded here. So for the moment, I'm just going to paste this out here. So instead of messages loaded like so, we're now going to do the same thing. Messages loaded. In fact, I already had the conversation ID here, didn't I? So we'll just throw that in like that. And we'll grab conversations.id, like so, conversations.message. Like that, close all that. And we'll just go for now. I'll remove this, I don't need that. Now we'll just say false, null. And I need to import that. So if I come over to my messages and I grab this same part here and just pump it in here. So hopefully everything should still work the same, but now we've added in a couple more extra fields, and looks like I've broken something. Put channel action argument. Oh, okay. All right. So we can't just call that method. It won't let us just call a method there. Oh, that's disappointing. That's very disappointing. So what this means is I now need to undo this. And do it this way. It's a bit unfortunate. Hopefully I'll be able to fix that later maybe. So we've got payload. So this goes So it's returning an object here. Oh, message is low. So I would have thought that returning an, no, hang on, calling that function should do the same thing. Because I'm invoking the function, which will return an object. Let's take a look. No, go back. Message is loaded, yeah. That should do the same thing I would have thought. Like that. This should return an object. Oh, at the moment I'm still not passing it through here. Grab this again. See, that's that's returning an object, right? So this is returning an object, which is type message loaded. So it's just returning an object. That right there. So what's the difference? Oh, I don't know. It worked this time. I must have done something different. Yeah, because it's like, I don't want to actually have that declared twice. I just want to call the function twice. Now, that means that we've dealt with, at least without the extra flags being set correctly here, we've dealt with the extra parameters being passed through though. So now we can come into the details that we have up here. And for messages loaded, we can now grab from our payload the has more messages, and we can also grab last message ID, just like that. And from this, we should be able to just go message details. That is called new entry. We've got our new entry up here, which is fine. So then all we need to do is add in the other two bits, which is has more messages and last message ID. And if I save that, that should now still work. Now I'm pretty sure I have a Redux debugger here, but then I realized I haven't set that up. So I think maybe the next step is for me to work out using dev tools, Redux, yeah, that thing, npm. Let's load this baby in so we can see what's in the store, right? This is what we want to see. We want to see what's in the store. We can't do that until we're able to profile it using these dev tools. So let's, probably should have done this a bit sooner, but never mind. It's getting done now, and that's all that matters. So dash save dev. We don't need this for prod. So let that do its thing. And while it's doing its thing, how do we initialize it? Where is it? How does it initialize? Come on. Create dev tools. Where's the basic use of it? Well, let's go to GitHub. Documentation, installation configuration. That's a browser extension. I just want to be able to wire it up in the, here we go. For Chrome, blah, blah, Firefox, blah, blah. For other browser, non-browser, note that from blah. With Redux, basic store. For basic Redux store, simply add this. Really? Note that preload state argument. Okay, for universal, it's not universal. For TypeScript, use DevTools extension npm package, which contains all the definitions, or just Windows as any. Really? I just have to add this. More advanced store setup. Yeah, because I've got some middleware in there, so I just need to make sure I'm doing this right. Store enhancers. Let's just grab this. And then in fact, we need to pretty much grab all this. And then we pass the enhancer as the second parameter. Let's just see if this works for now. We can tweak it later. So coming into here, after it creates the Saga middleware, before it creates the store, let's just whack that crap in there. And then we just grab enhancer. In fact, Saga middleware needs to go where the ... middleware is, just like that. Let's see if this actually makes it work. So, is it still compiling? Let's check. Compose is not defined. Alright, so we're missing something. So in Redux, so compose. Cool. Let's see if we can see stuff now. Hey, check all this out. Beautiful. Alright, so we've got this is our store, right? So we can look at our state. We've got our conversation state. We can see what's in it right now. Alright, all this gobbledygook is just an image. Alright, wouldn't worry too much about that. But we can see all our conversations, which we're not really that interested in right now. What we're more interested in is our messages state, where we've got our first lot of messages. So we can see there's nothing else going in for that first entry at the moment. So for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be adding that new info that we added here, which has more messages and last message ID. Now, it could be because these are undefined. So let's just make sure that they're not. So console.log, and we'll grab these two and just see what they spit out. Like so. And they are spitting out undefined. So that means that the type for messages loaded is not including these, which could make sense. So it looks like I've got them there. Messages loaded, Haspel message, blah blah. Messages loaded. Let's see, right? So if I open up the Redux again, at the moment I've just got the first conversation. If I load in the second one, so if I now look at the messages loaded action down here, we can see we've got 2 entries, and we can see the messages are loading here. The extra properties are loaded here. So it's working when I call messages loaded inside of my messages saga. So here when we're seeing these up, they're there. But when I set up my conversation saga, well, we can see why. Because we're not passing in anything for those values. So I'll say false and null, just to see that we get stuff. Cool. Messages loaded. There's our first lot of messages, page 1. And then there's our 2 flags for now. Cool. So the state is kind of how I want it. But obviously this isn't necessarily accurate. Plus we haven't really added any paging. All we've done at this stage is added some extra properties to the state. Now we need to utilize those properties and be able to take advantage of them in our components. But the first step was to get them into state, right, and get our state the shape that we wanted. So now that they're there, we can take advantage of them in our components. So coming over to my containers folder, message list component. We're calling get messages for conversation. I think this is going to change because we're not just going to be grabbing messages anymore. We're going to be grabbing if we have any new messages, because if we don't need to require to get more messages, we don't need to call load messages. All right. But if we do require the ability to go and get more messages, then we should. All right. That's the key. What else? Just trying to think here. So use effect, load messages, if messages. No, because this should be constructed. So this here should only ever happen once. So regardless, that shouldn't change much. But the number of messages coming back will change. So we're going to load messages, and this will dispatch an action. And I think in here, what I'm going to do is say, can you go and get me only 3 messages? And I want you to get them where the last message ID is equal to whatever that is. All right, so message requested is going to have 2 new properties on it. So message requested, and I'm going to call this, we'll call it number of messages. So number of messages to fetch, essentially. Conversation ID and last message ID. So these will now go into this payload. So number of messages and last message ID. Like so. Oh, Jesus. That was totally wrong. Last message ID. Now this will still pass, but we're hopefully passing into our Saga now for that particular action, those values. So we can say last message IDs here. Don't need has more messages, I just realized. Well, we do, but it won't be coming in from the payload. Last message ID will be, so this is not needed. Messages will be message details, conversation ID. And we'll just check for the moment that this is coming through now, this last message ID. Just want to make sure that that's coming through to our Saga. Even if it's null and not undefined, it's perfect. And we're getting false and null. And why am I getting false and null? Because, where's my consoles in this application? Got a few of them. Not in service worker. So that's for the Saga reducer. Yeah, I'm going to get rid of this now. Don't need that anymore. Cool. Alright, so it didn't load the messages, but that's because the first initial load of conversations also loads in the messages there. But if I choose this, okay, it's saying undefined. So that's not ideal. It's not what we want. And it's probably because I didn't save this file. And it might still come back with undefined, and it is. And that would be because I'm not passing it through to load messages up here. So for now, I'm just going to say null and save, just so I can know it's passing something through. And there's the null, beautiful. So now I need to distinguish how I'm going to get this last message ID. So it's going to come from state, obviously. So if we look at our map state to props at the moment, we're just returning messages from our message details. What we probably need to return now is the actual message details. So instead of it being messages, this will become message details, just like that. right? So that means that we are going to return. Actually, I'll keep that line in there because I might use it up in the component. But we're going to return that. Now that's going to break a whole bunch of stuff, but that's fine. And for now, I'll just go message details. No. What am I going to do here? We'll just go const messages equals message details, then message details dot messages, otherwise null. That's what I, whoops. Oh God. There be spaces there. So this should make it work again. Cool. One step at a time as we do this. So now what I want to do is I just want to quickly console out, console.log the message details out, just to see what we've got access to. And we can see we've got the Hasmul messages and last message ID available to us, which is fantastic. So now we can say if not message details, all right, we're now going to basically replace messages with message details. And I'm going to put into this last bit here, message details dot, oh, actually no, this would be, because if this is the first time, we won't have any message details, I understand. I'll just put null for the moment, like that, and see what we get. So if we actually get null at any point for this, it doesn't look like we will, but I reckon if we choose another one, yeah, we get an initial undefined and then an initial null, and then we get an object. Now, is that actually the same console log for, so is this actually being called twice here? It is. Yeah, because, oh no, I click null, I click the value and it comes up with null. So there's going to be another console log somewhere. So many console logs in this application. All right, so we'll get rid of that for the moment. We know that's coming through. I just want to make sure that the one console I get here is coming from the right component. So if I load this up now, we should get, first time it comes in, it's undefined for when I choose one of these. So it's undefined and then it's a value. All right, so we need to cater for that. So if it's not something, then we need to pass that in. So it's always going to be null here when I think about it. Last message ID is not going to be set at any point during the first page load, because this is only ever going to fire the first time this component's being created. So we've got conversation ID, we've got load messages and message details. They're all used in the effect, which is good. So the next step is, once we get to that point, we've got our messages.message length. That's all the same. So I think for the most part, this doesn't need to change. All right, we can leave this as is, and that will be all we need to do for now, I think. Just trying to think here. Conversation, message details, if you use effect, not message details, load messages. Yeah, so from this point onwards, messages will always, updating the message details in the state will always recall this, which will then re-get the messages, and therefore as a result recreate the list of messages. Cool. So I don't think we need to do anything else inside of this component, at least not right now. Obviously, when we add infinite scroll and all that stuff, and we need to detect there were a certain period up the screen where we want to load in the next lot of previous messages, we will have some functionality to load messages based on whether there's any more messages or anything of that nature. But for now, we won't worry about that. What we'll do instead is we'll load them in asynchronously behind the scenes. So, but the first thing I want to do is I want to get the first page, all right? At the moment, we're not getting the first page. We're not getting the first three. It's still getting everything. All right, so if I load that, you can see it still gets everything. So, what we need to do now is we need to update the code in the Saga. We'll start off with the messages Saga. So this now needs to take into consideration the count. So I'm pretty sure that's on the messages requested action. So I'll just quickly make sure that's there. Yep, number of messages. So now messages Saga, I'm going to grab that out like so. And the last message ID will be a reference point to where we'll slice the array for the conversation's messages from this object here. So that'll be the starting point, or where the next message will be gathered from will be after this one. And then we'll grab this many and return that, or pass that number of messages through to messages loaded. Yeah. Sounds confusing, but we have to do this slowly. Otherwise it is very confusing. So now what I'm probably going to do is I really need to establish where the starting point is in our messages array here that we want to start fetching these messages from, right? So if we're got a last message ID of null, then we should start from the first entry and get the first three, like so. However, if we get our last message ID that matches, say, this item, then we should get the one after that. So the first thing I need to do here, believe it or not, is add IDs to these things. So ID, we'll go 1, ID 2, and ID 3. Should have done this earlier, but I didn't. ID 4, ID 5, ID 6, ID 7, and we'll go ID 8 and 9. So that's for conversation 2, but obviously there's 9 conversations, so they will probably need, a 1 against each one here. So we can close that one up, move to 4, do the same thing, close that one up, 5, like that, close that up, 6, 7, 8, and the last conversation is 9. Cool. Now, number of messages it's saying is not used yet, but that's fine. So now what we need to do is, based on last message ID, if it's null, we grab the first entry and how many we need. If it happens to equal 1, well, we find it where ID equals 1, and then we grab how many. If we're looking for messages, if the ID is 1, it should grab message 2, and then how many messages. If the ID comes back says 4, then we grab 5, and then any number of messages after 5, based on the number of messages we want to get, which in this case I've set 3 for the moment. But you can see the idea. So If it's null, we go from the very start of the array. If the ID happens to match one of these messages, then we start from the one after it and grab as many as we can based on the count. Cool. So I'm going to close this down. So I want to look at that again. And we'll start looking for that start index. So I think we'll go const start index is equal to messages dot find index, where the message dot ID is equal to last message ID, just like that. And then if that is not found, it'll probably return -1, which means we want the start of the array. If it returns anything else, say 4, 5, whatever, then we're going to get the next one, which is +1, right? And then 0. But I think that if last message ID is not set at all, so it's null or undefined, then we should just return 0 here. So we know we're definitely at the start of the array here. Cool. So that's the start index. I think we need the end index. So const end index. Well, this should be equal to the start index plus, well, I think it would be the number of messages, right? Because if we're at 0, it'll be 0 plus the number of messages. Oh, sorry. If we're to start at 0, it'll be 0 plus the number of messages we want to get. No, because that would equal 0 to 3, which would get 4. But I can use the slice command, which gives you an upper bound limit that is excluded. So I can say const page, we'll say paged messages. It's not really a page, it's called more of a, we'll say group, page group is equal to messages dot slice, starting at the start index and finishing before the end index. So if this is a 3, it'll be 0, 1, and 2 that gets returned here, not 0, 1, 2, 3. And I think that's perfect because we want 3 items. All right, so I think that will work. And then we need to gather the new last message ID. So const new last message ID, because we've fetched a different part of the array. So the next time we call this, it'll start from the next point where this message ID is. So this would be equal to, if it's a new, if we have a new message ID in the first place, and, no, sorry, hang on. That would be if we wanted to know if there was any pages left. So this should be equal to page group dot length if it's greater than 0, because it's quite possible that when we call slice, we might be at the very end of the array and it actually returns nothing in the array. So if that's the case, then we're going to say we're at the end, right? I'm pretty sure. So in that case, we would just go, well, if the length is greater than 0, then we do have something left. So we go page messages, paged, no, it's not page messages, what am I saying? Page group to page group dot length -1. So we're getting the last value. We're grabbing its ID. Otherwise, if there's nothing left, we just say null because there's nothing left to fetch, all right? The last thing we need to do is just determine if we have any more messages to fetch. Has more messages, which I had up here. All right. has more messages is equal to if this new last message ID, if that has a value in it, and the end index, so this value that we set from start index plus whatever, if that is less than the maximum index that's in the DB. So it's possible, messages.length. It's possible that end index could be a larger number than the highest index in the original messages array. If that is the case, then it has to be true. Otherwise, it will be false. Cool. All right, so all I need to do here is go last message ID is equal to new last message ID. And it's not an object, so I think that should do it in terms of determining the slice of messages. Let's see if it just returns 3. Now, it's still going to return all for the initial load, but that's okay. But if I come here, it still returns everything. Oh, because... No, that doesn't make sense. So we call messages loaded. Oh, I'm passing in messages. I should be passing in page group, the cut down version of it. The subset. Now if I click on this, I should only get 3. And I do. Beautiful. Now, that's great and everything. So we've got it down to the point where it's loading only the first 3, but we don't really know for sure if it will understand where to get the next 3. So let's check our store. Just make sure that the last message ID should be the message ID that matches that message there. So last message ID, in this case, it still says null. All right, so we need to handle a few things there. Oh, hang on, that's for the first item. Where's the next one? Messages loaded. Oh, here we go. Yeah, sorry, my bad. Oh, yeah, no, it's got it. Last message equals 3. Has more messages equals true. And then we've got our 3 messages there. So the ID is 3. Fantastic. All right. So I think the next thing we need to do is kind of perform kind of what we would do if we were to scroll up and go outside the bounds here, and it would load in more messages. I'm going to try and simulate that. I'm just trying to think of the best way to simulate it. Yeah, so I'm thinking potentially I might do it inside the components to start off with. So my messages list component, I might have a delay or something somewhere that will basically just check if it's not loaded. I'm just trying to think of the best place to put it. So this is perfect. Messages reducer. Now I don't want to put it in the middle reducer either. Conversations saga. Interesting. Message list. I mean, the obvious place to potentially put this is where I call load messages. No. Maybe just in the saga, I'll just delay it. I think that's probably the best option. And then I can go if has more messages. Yeah, maybe down here. If, no, then that will. Wait a minute. If I just go if has more messages, will yield another delay. And then I will basically yield a put to itself. So I'll just yield this. No, I'm not going to yield. I'm not going to call that function. I'm going to put. I'm just going to put this in here as an object for now. Type equals that, and the payload will equal everything up here essentially. So conversation ID. Oh God. Conversation ID. Spell it right, Daryl. Number of messages. And instead of last message ID, we will have, well, we need that value. So this will be equal to new last message ID. And that should just call it again with the next reference point. We'll see how this works. Hopefully we don't get caught in a bad loop here. So if I now call this, we have first 3. All right. So at least now it's getting 3, but it looks like it's just updating the state in the reducer rather than, or replacing, sorry, instead of appending, all right? Which is kind of what it kind of makes sense. So if I now come in and do this, it didn't continue to load messages loaded any further. So that would indicate that it does in fact detect that the last message is in fact 9 and has more messages is set to false. And that's perfect. That's exactly what I want, because the last message in the overall set of messages had an ID of 9. All right, so it has determined that it knows where the end is. Fantastic. So the next thing we need to do is just make sure instead of replacing the messages, we append them. So I'm going to come over to my messages reducer, and the message is loaded now, where we has more messages, last message ID, that's all fine. Instead of just replacing messages, I'm going to now go const messages, or sorry, I just realized I don't want that either. We can get rid of that. New messages equals state. Just trying to think. No, we need, let's say new conversation map entry, but technically that's not what we're doing anymore. We're not creating a new entry every time anymore. That made sense when we were loading all the messages at once, but we're not doing that now. We're actually loading a page at a time. So now we need to have conditional logic here. We need to have let current conversation entry. This is going to be equal to message details state.message details, sorry. State.message details, and that will be conversation ID. Now, if this has something in it, in fact, that's a const. So if, we'll just go if current conversation entry, if that exists, then our new conversation entry needs to basically take all the information that's in there and use, well, and append these two things. That's my understanding. So we can say, well, the first thing we do is we go, const new conversation entry equals has more messages and last message ID, like that. And when we do have something, then we're going to go that dot messages is equal to that dot messages, but with the spread operator, like that. So we're grabbing all the current messages that are in the current entry and we're adding them to a new entry. Otherwise, if that doesn't exist, then in fact we don't need to do anything, because I can come up here and go messages equals blank. All right. So once I do that, then this goes away. It now just becomes new conversation entry dot messages equals the same messages in an array plus the ones that have come in from the payload. So now we're just appending those two together, and now new conversation entry dot messages, well, that will become part of that. I think everything else stays the same here. Let's give that a go. I've got an error. New conversation map entry. Oh, I called it entry here, map entry. So let's give it the same name here as well. And I should call this map entry as well. Just make it easy on myself. Keep things consistent. Save. Cool. So hopefully this time what will happen is, well, that's the initial stuff there is broken, but I don't care for now. And that's also broken. All right. Okay, so I've done something wrong. My state is not quite right here. Message details. 1 has more messages. Last message ID and messages. Is that wrong though? I don't think that's wrong. Isn't that the style I wanted up here in the first place? Let's take a look. Oh, come on, man. I will go forward again. I want to see what this was. Ah, there it is. Yeah, that's the same. Last message ID has more messages and messages. Isn't that what I've got? Save. Messages. Is it an array? An array. Oh. It's an array of an array. So that's what I've done wrong here. So but I've just said there's an object there. So why is it an array of an array? Oh, I didn't spread that. I think that's what it is. Let's see if it fixes itself now. All right, so that's the initial list and subsequent lists. All right, so that's the first light. Oh, it's appending. Oh, beautiful, look. And then it doesn't load anymore. Great. Let's try it again. So we refresh the page. We know initially we're going to get everything, which is correct. That's kind of what we want. We don't want it to page at this point. And then when we choose a different person, however, we probably only want to get a first set of messages. In fact, no, it should only get the first set of messages here too. Not all of them. It should get the first, well, in this case it's 3. So when I first load, it should get 3. And then it should subsequently get the rest. So that hopefully will be easy to address. I think I just need to come down to my conversation saga, and when I call messages loaded, so I need to simulate. Just trying to think here. I'm going to have to simulate the same behavior I've done in request messages for this first part. So I think probably the best option here, really, yeah, it's going to add that delay back. I was going to say I could just invoke inside my Saga here the initial page by just calling messages requested, but then that's going to add a 1 second delay regardless. And I kind of want the first 3 items to come up and then have that work the way it works. So I'm just trying to think the best way to emulate this as a Saga, because the Sagas will get changed later anyway, because we'll be using backend systems. But I just want to emulate that kind of behavior using these Sagas and not actually bleeding it into the rest of the application. So the idea would be when we're going to fetch it from the server, do we tell in that server call how many messages we want to return for the initial conversation? We probably do. So probably part of conversation requested, we pass in the number of pages or the number of messages that we want to load as part of the initial load of the conversation. Maybe. Just trying to think. I mean, it's a minor issue right now because it's really not that big of a deal, because we can see that it is in fact paging now, and it's actually grabbing a set amount of messages after a second. All right, and we can actually change that value in our messages list by saying, actually, I want you to get 5, right? And then hopefully that will get us the first 5. So we'll highlight here, there's 5, and then obviously there's 4. All right, so there was only 9 messages in total. So it did 2 lots, and that's it. So that's working. I think for now, I'm just going to drop it here, and I'll think about what I'm going to do in terms of the initial load here when I refresh, and it kind of pops everything in and doesn't actually do the paging. But I'll worry about that for the next time. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the very next session.